Hi there, I'm Jim, your companion on the journey of emotional healing and awakening. If you've ever felt stuck in a relationship that keeps you swinging between hope and confusion, then this video is for you. You see, some people come into our lives like a passing breeze, close enough to stir feelings, but always distant enough to stay out of reach. They text just enough to keep you from leaving, but disappear when you seek deeper connection. They make you feel like you did something wrong, when in truth, they're just afraid of their own emotions. In this video, I'll help you understand the psychological mechanism behind avoidant attachment, and more importantly, I'll show you how to take back your emotional power. This isn't about changing them. It's about you no longer losing yourself to hold on to a relationship that hurts. Stay with me till the end of this video, because I'll reveal a powerful shift, one that once you grasp it, not only frees you from silence, withdrawal, and confusion, but makes you grounded, clear, and untouchable by manipulation. And don't forget to follow and subscribe if you want more content on healing, setting boundaries, and building love from a place of self-worth, emotional stability, and wisdom. Here's the truth. Avoidantly attached people can only maintain their power in a relationship when you haven't yet fully understood your own worth and emotions. When your inner foundation is shaky, it's easy to get pulled into the emotional maze they create, where everything feels vague and you're the one constantly seeking clarity. They don't control you with overt cruelty, they control you with ambiguity. A timely silence, a half-hearted text, a gaze warm enough to keep you close, but never deep enough to make you feel safe. It's this lack of consistency that makes you believe the problem is you, that if you could just love more patiently, be less sensitive, try a little harder, they would finally open up. But the truth? They're not avoiding you, they're avoiding the intimacy you represent, and you with a heart that longs for a connection become a silent threat that triggers their deepest fears. I know that feeling. The feeling of giving everything to hold on to something shapeless. You begin to question yourself, wonder if your needs are too much, if your attachment is a burden, and so bit by bit you shrink. You speak less, ask for less, become less just to keep them from walking away. But here's what you need to know. Your silence won't keep them close. It only distances you from yourself. And that's where you must pause. Not to blame them, but to see clearly. They're operating from fear, not emotional maturity. And you deserve to be loved from a place of fullness, not by someone hiding from their own emotions. When you see this, something powerful happens. The balance of power begins to shift. You stop reacting from anxiety. You start responding from clarity. Their silence no longer unravels you. Their withdrawal no longer shakes your worth. Because you begin to ask a more important question. Why am I settling for so little just to keep someone who's not ready for more? This isn't the time to decode them, it's the time to stand up for yourself. And I share this not from anger, but from deep sincerity, because I know there is a stronger version of you waiting to rise, a version that no longer needs to be chosen to feel worthy, a version that knows clarity isn't a luxury, it's a basic right in love. And once you begin to stand on your own side, once the light of awareness begins to break through, you'll start to see something clearly. They're not as strong as you once believed. They're just good at hiding their fear. And the strategy they use to protect themselves is simple. They avoid intimacy. It sounds paradoxical, doesn't it? Who would fear love? Who would fear closeness? But for the avoidant, emotional intimacy doesn't feel safe, it feels threatening. To them, closeness triggers old, unresolved wounds, fears of being smothered, controlled, or ultimately abandoned. These fears are buried deep in their past, often from relationships where vulnerability led to pain. And to avoid reliving that pain, they retreat. But they don't do it overtly. They don't say, I'm scared of getting close. Instead, they send mixed signals. They show interest, then disappear. They give you just enough to stay, but never enough to feel secure. You're left wondering, What did I do wrong? What made them pull back? So you begin adjusting, you share less, you ask for less, you shrink yourself just to avoid triggering their fear. But do you see what's happening here? You're unknowingly participating in their defense mechanism. Instead of letting them confront their discomfort with intimacy, you start dimming your own light so they won't run. And that is exactly what allows them to continue maintaining the emotional distance that feels safe to them. But here's the truth. You didn't do anything wrong. You've simply been drawn into a dynamic the avoidant knows too well, one where one person withdraws and the other chases. One guards and the other over-explains. One fears connection and the other fears disconnection. And when you're the one trying to understand, you might start believing that love can heal them. That if you're just patient and kind enough, they'll feel safe enough to stay. But love alone is not a substitute for emotional maturity. It's not enough if the other person is still living from fear they're not ready to face. So instead of asking, how do I get them to open up more? Start asking, why am I accepting a relationship where intimacy has to be negotiated instead of being a natural part of connection? Avoidants aren't bad people. They're also hurt, anxious, unsure how to trust. But their fear cannot be the place where you lose yourself. You cannot keep walking beside someone who reaches for your hand only to let it go every time you get close. When you finally understand that they're not reacting to you, but to their own fear, you stop taking their behavior so personally. You stop living in emotional hypervigilance, constantly trying to decode whether today they'll be warm or distant, present or withdrawn. This is the turning point. When you stop trying to normalize emotional inconsistency. When you finally believe that you deserve clarity, consistency, and emotional safety. And it is that belief, not punishment, not anger, that starts to destabilize their entire defense mechanism. Not because you're trying to change them, but because you're changing what you allow in your life. And then, at some point after all the unanswered messages, the half-hearted conversations, the emotional disappearances, you stop feeling confused. You stop blaming yourself. And instead, you begin to see the game for what it is. You look back at your journey and suddenly realize, it's not that I wasn't enough. It's that I stayed too long in something where I was the only one showing up. That moment is what I call awakening. Not a dramatic explosion, but a quiet shift with deep weight. When you finally see they didn't act this way because of you, they acted from their own fear. And you weren't reacting out of love, you were reacting out of a fear of being left behind. When you begin to understand the emotional engine behind their behavior, you start pulling your energy out of the game. No more overanalyzing texts. No more waiting on a reply like your worth depends on it. No more calibrating your emotional state based on whether they show up or not. You start asking different questions, not, why are they so cold? But, why am I still giving so much to someone who won't meet me halfway? As you shift from reacting to their emotional instability to listening to your own inner wisdom, the entire dynamic changes. Their silence no longer feels like punishment. Their withdrawal no longer defines your value. You begin to see everything they do says more about them than it ever did about you. And this doesn't make you bitter or closed off. On the contrary, it makes you clear and calm. Because now you know you don't have to suffer to be worthy. You don't have to wait to be chosen. You don't have to perform or prove anything to be loved. Awakening is when you realize their silence is no longer a weapon. It's a space where you can hear your own voice. It's when you stop because you've grown, not because you've given up. It's when you finally understand that real love comes with clarity and anything less doesn't deserve to stay. Awakening is also when you stop rationalizing someone's emotional absence as something innocent, and instead you see it for what it is: emotional avoidance and lack of accountability. And if someone cannot meet you with honesty and presence, you respect yourself enough to walk away. You don't need to punish them. You don't need to send one more long message. You don't need to teach them a lesson. All you need to do is pull your energy back, reclaim your heart, and return to your peace. Because from that moment on, you're no longer the one being played, you're simply the one who stopped playing. And that is where the real transformation begins. And from the very moment you stop trying to fix things, stop chasing, you begin to enter a new state of being, detachment. Not everyone understands what that truly means. Some confuse detachment with indifference, with becoming cold or distant. But the truth is, detachment is not about shutting your heart down, it's about expanding your awareness. It's not about giving up on love, it's about loving yourself in a healthier way. When you detach, you don't abandon your emotions. You can still care, still feel, still remember. But you no longer let those emotions lead you into unconscious patterns. You no longer reach out just because you're afraid of losing them. You no longer stay silent just to keep the peace. You stop repeating the old pattern of doing whatever it takes so they don't walk away. Detachment is the moment you realize your energy is a sacred resource and not something to be drained unconditionally. You begin to set new limits on what you give and on what you're willing to receive. Not to retaliate, but to stop investing in connections that lack clarity and commitment. And this quiet shift causes something powerful to stir in the avoidant because they've grown used to being pursued. Used to knowing you'll always go first. Used to holding emotional power without ever being fully present. But now, when you no longer react the way you used to, they start to lose their footing. They can't read you the same way. They can't control the emotional distance. And that unsettles them not because you're punishing them, but because you're no longer emotionally controllable. The more grounded you become, the more uneasy they feel. The clearer you are, the more their vagueness stands out. The steadier you move, the more their emotional inconsistency is exposed. And this is not a battle. It's the natural recalibration of power, a shift where you're no longer caught in the game of retreat and pursue. You stand firm, anchored in a new truth. I matter too. My emotions are valid, and I don't have to abandon myself just to keep someone close. Detachment creates sacred space to see clearly, to breathe deeply, to choose wisely. You can observe without absorbing, listen without attaching, love without losing your center. Avoidants feel this shift. They notice that the reactions they once relied on no longer work. Their silence no longer pulls you in. Their coldness no longer ignites your panic. You are no longer orbiting around their emotional gravity. And for many avoidants, this triggers anxiety not because they're losing you, but because they're losing the emotional control system they unconsciously used to feel safe. And in that moment, you don't have to do anything extra. You don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to prove anything. All you have to do is remain grounded in your detachment and let your inner stillness become the clearest answer you'll ever give. And once you've begun practicing detachment, Tanse, you've tasted the inner peace that no longer rises and falls with someone else's presence. You take one step further on your journey back to yourself. You learn to set boundaries. This is where many emotionally wounded people stumble. They fear that setting boundaries means being selfish, harsh, or pushing people away. But the truth is, boundaries are not about controlling others. They are about being clear with yourself and with them. Boundaries are how you say, I know what I need to feel safe in connection. They are not walls, they're doors with locks, and you get to decide who enters, how, and when. When you ask for consistency, clarity, and responsible communication, you're not asking too much. You're affirming the bare minimum required for a healthy relationship. And the avoidant who is so used to operating in ambiguity will often feel shaken by that clarity. Because boundaries disrupt the fog they've relied on to avoid emotional accountability. When you say, I need consistency, or I won't stay in a connection that lacks presence and honesty, you're taking the game out of their world and bringing it into an emotionally mature one. The avoidant now faces a choice. Retreat because transparency is too confronting, or rise up and grow into the emotional space you've invited them into. Either way, you win. Because boundaries remove the guessing, the shape-shifting, the second-guessing, and replace it with truth. You stop living in fantasy and start observing the reality of their consistent actions. That can hurt, but it's no longer blinding. You might grieve, but you no longer cling. Because you understand now. Love that asks you to sacrifice your emotional needs, your values, and your voices, not love. It's a transaction. When you set a boundary, you're not applying pressure. You're creating space for both people to be honest with where they stand. And the beauty of it is, you don't have to yell, you don't have to demand. You just have to live your boundary quietly, steadily, consistently, and it will reshape the dynamic all by itself. You no longer need someone to agree with your boundary for it to matter. Its power comes from your self-respect when you act on it. That quiet conviction is what forces others to choose. Either meet you in truth or accept that they can no longer access you the way they used to. Avoidants are not used to this. They're used to flexibility. Used to you softening your needs, reading between the lines, understanding them without being understood. But boundaries are a wake-up call. They mark the end of the chase and the beginning of a dynamic where only real intimacy can survive. And once you've had the courage to set boundaries not from anger, not to punish, but because you finally know you deserve clarity, something even deeper begins to happen within you. Something more powerful than any strategy, more transformative than any attachment theory. You begin to heal. Healing is not a destination, it's a process. A slow and sacred return to yourself. And the first thing you surrender on that journey is this: loving from fear. You no longer love to be chosen. You no longer love to fill a void. You no longer love as a way to prove your worth. Instead, you begin to love from wholeness, from a place where you've already seen, accepted, and embraced yourself, including the parts that once felt unworthy. You stop needing someone else to validate that you're enough. Because now, you validate yourself not with words, but with your actions, your choices, and the things you no longer tolerate. And that shift, the one inside you, is what collapses the entire avoidant dynamic. Because that dynamic only survives when you are still reacting from your wounds. As long as you're triggered by silence, anxious in the distance, and decoding every mixed signal, you're still inside the system. But when you heal, their inconsistency no longer destabilizes you. Their withdrawal no longer feels like abandonment. You stop clinging to the hope that maybe if you love them just a little harder, they'll finally stay. Instead, you look calmly at the truth. Ambiguity is no longer attractive. Coldness no longer feels mysterious. Disconnection no longer triggers panic. And that confuses the avoidant. They're used to being mirrored by anxiety, used to you filling in the gaps, used to a pattern where they never have to show up fully because you've been doing the emotional work for both of you. But now, when you no longer respond the way you used to, they're left face to face with their own emptiness. There's no longer a version of you to lean on. No longer a script they can run. No longer someone playing the role of the one who understands everything. You don't need their brokenness to feel strong. You don't need their return to feel worthy. You are enough because you finally chose yourself, perhaps for the first time in a long time. And from that place, you begin to choose differently. You no longer choose relationships based on potential. You choose based on presence. You're no longer drawn to what's vague. You crave what's clear. You no longer stay because being chosen makes you feel special. You stay when being yourself feels safe. That's the power of healing. It doesn't just change you. It dismantles the entire structure that once kept you stuck. And the beautiful part? Once you've stepped into healing, you're no longer dependent on external outcomes. Whether the avoidant comes back or walks away, you're unshaken, because from now on, your emotional stability no longer lives in their hands. And if you're still wondering whether you're asking for too much, let me be clear, once and for all, you're not asking for too much, you're just asking the wrong person. You're not wrong for wanting clarity. You're not wrong for needing to be heard, to feel connected, to feel emotionally safe in love. That's not too much. That's the baseline of a healthy connection. But when you bring your sincere heart to someone who's not ready to face their own emotions, you'll always be made to feel too sensitive, too needy, or too much. Don't believe that. The truth is, real love never asks you to shrink to fit. It invites you to show up fully and still be received. When you begin to heal, you stop chasing someone just to be chosen. You start choosing yourself. And from that place, old patterns fall away. Shaky connections lose their hold. And those who aren't ready will naturally step aside. Not because you became hard, but because you no longer trade your peace to hold on to what isn't worthy of your presence. Remember this. You are not hard to love. You're just no longer willing to settle for half love. And that changes everything. So if you needed a reminder today, choose clarity over intensity. Choose stability over chaos. And choose yourself not just when you're hurting, but even more when you begin to realize you've always deserved more. Thank you for walking this journey with me, and never forget, coming home to yourself begins with one brave step, and today you've already taken it.